Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Hello. Welcome to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. That's Zain Bando. I'm Tom Albano. And it is the fallout from UFC 278. So, compared to last week, it's going to be a little bit of an inverse. A lot more recap, a lot less previewing. Zain, it's been an absolutely wild last few days. And let's just be honest with our audience. They know why they're here. We know why we're here. We know what the big story is.
Oh, absolutely. And again, welcome back to the show, everyone. And as Tom was mentioning before, this is the time of year where the UFC gets into its little mini dead period. So yeah, we will have a lot more recapping to do this week on the show. But yeah, everybody knows why they're here. Obviously, last weekend, UFC 278 in Salt Lake City. A lot happened, especially with the main event. Again, those are tickers down there. Tom is at Fansided. I am at bjpen.com. You can find our work there. And be sure to like and subscribe and share the show with all of your friends so that they know that the MMA Outsiders is one of the most up-and-coming MMA shows on the market today. But I wanted to start off, as I was saying earlier, with UFC 278. Everybody knows why they're here because actually, if you were to really sit down and really think about this, the moment that Leon Edwards landed his winning head kick was a moment frozen in time. And it was one of those fights where, it looked interesting for the first round and Usman kind of coasted the next three. And then all of a sudden, he got a little bit too complacent. And then obviously, Leon Edwards turns the world literally on its axis, wins the UFC welterweight championship, becomes the second fighter from the UK to do so. And truly, and I know that there was some debate on MMA Twitter about this. Our account chimed in on this. This is without a doubt, in my opinion, the greatest ending to a title fight that I've ever seen. Not only that, it's one of the greatest comebacks I've ever seen. I'm not trying to disrespect it because it was unbelievable, but I would have to put it just slightly below Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, and the reason why I say that is because Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen had a lot more hype around it. I think a lot more people were anticipating that fight, and there just seemed to be a lot more buzz. And Sonnen was kind of proclaiming that he was going to do it the whole time. And I just feel like Leon Edwards, even though he was saying, yeah, I'm going to win and whatever, it wasn't as paramount as Chael Sonnen's month-long media crusade that he put on everyone. But nonetheless, it's a fantastic finish. Leon Edwards becomes the new UFC welterweight champion. It opens up a whole world of possibilities for him. It's again, like I said at the beginning of my spiel here, it's for sure a moment that's frozen in time, and a moment where you can always remember where you were when it happened. And as you know, and we can get into this a little bit more in the show, but these late August cards have had some magic to them, and this one certainly did as well.
Definitely. And I think you had the perfect expression, frozen in time, because that is going to be a moment that gets replayed forever and ever. Even if Leon Edwards doesn't win another fight in the UFC somehow, he has now officially made his mark. And I had said that night it was the greatest comeback in a title fight. I definitely think it's the greatest comeback knockout. And as far as a title fight goes, I think I was thinking in recency bias that night. And now with you, I do agree that Silva versus Sonnen was probably up, is the number one. This is the number two.
I would say this is number two for sure. And I don't know if you were following MMA at this point in time, but that knockout reminded me of a knockout that took place 12 or so years ago now. Mike Russo versus Todd Duffy. It was just one of those where,
The out of nowhere.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was my first thought. I'm like, what, hey, is this fight replayed 12 years later, except it was a title fight? And sure enough, kind of a similar thing happened. So
The reason I say Silva Sonnen number one also is because Silva had him Sonnen had him basically for 4 rounds. Edwards, we kind of got a little hint early on that maybe something could have happened because right away, first round of the fight, Edwards scores a takedown. Never had been done before in the UFC. Nobody had taken Usman down. Edwards got taken down by Usman, I think 6, if not 7 times in their first fight at the end of 2015. And now here, Edwards had completely tackled Usman, put him on his back on the ground, and I actually, on my scorecard, gave that first round to Leon Edwards. I think Leon Edwards...
I did as well. Did you? I'm kind of curious. Going into the 5th round, I had it...
I had it 3-1.
I had it 3-1, but I had it more specifically 39-37. Did you have that as well?
You gave it 10-8? Which one?
I gave it 10-8, particularly in round 3.
I don't think I gave 10-8, but I think I did have it 3-1 at the very least. That Leon needed a finish in that 5th round. And you could actually sense the urgency in that corner with Edwards' coach basically telling him to stop feeling sorry for himself, to get up and basically throw everything that he has. And it's kind of funny you talk about a moment frozen in time and Edwards being just completely gassed and exhausted after Usman basically had his way with him for 3 rounds, because you had Cormier and Rogan basically saying that Leon looked done. He looked like he was quitting and was just going to let the decision happen. In my opinion,
and then of course you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I apologize. Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll add what I was going to say.
Okay. Leon, I mean, he kind of had looked a little broken to me, but I wouldn't say he was completely cruising to a decision. I think it had just been Usman basically, taking him to the woodshed for 3 rounds. In that last round, Edwards needed, especially that last minute, to pull out anything and everything. That head kick was kind of like a Hail Mary as the clock in the 4th quarter is hitting 0 and it scores for a touchdown. Well, Leon, it wasn't so much luck because he set up perfectly with the fake punch and the perfectly timed head kick, perfectly positioned head of Usman, and it just connected right on the button. I wouldn't necessarily call it that much luck. I think luck played a little bit of it, but I think Leon ended up setting it up well. And again, just how often do you see something like this in mixed martial arts, let alone the UFC? Rarely ever.
You don't. What I was going to say too was after Rogan and DC were proclaiming that Usman was going to win the fight, you could hear John Anik say, "Well, this isn't the cloth from which Leon Edwards is cut." And sure enough, the second after he says that, he knocks him out. So some people are calling it one of the greatest one-liners in MMA history, and John Anik's taking a ton of credit for it. But I just think that quote, coupled with that kick, is going to be something that people remember.
It's immortalized.
What's even more interesting is, I'm not sure if you watched this video, but there was a video that was posted of Henry Cejudo talking to Usman's manager.
Ali.
And exactly. And 2 minutes before the kick, he tells Ali, he's like, "Yeah, man, this is easy money." And then sure enough, you could hear Leon Edwards' corner scream, "The head kick, it's there, go for it." And then he lands the head kick. Like that was just the moment in time was just absolutely unbelievable. And I could only, and now they didn't show this on the broadcast, but I could only envision what what Dana's reaction was to that kick, because as you know, he had been hyping Usman up as the greatest welterweight of all time. He had already surpassed George St. Pierre, and I think we can say I think we can still say that George St. Pierre deserves his rightful claim to still be number one after Saturday.
Absolutely. Although to Usman's credit, GSP had his couple of losses, and now for Usman, this is going to be the test now.
That's true,
this is going to be
here's the difference. Here's the difference. George St. Pierre technically never lost the title. Like he never when he
lost to Sarah, didn't he?
Well, no, that was the very first time. But when he had his really long run and retired in 2013,
okay,
he didn't retire off of a loss.
That's true. He should have. He should have. I stay to this day. Johnny Hendricks won that fight.
No, I agree with you. I agree. I'm just saying the history books say that when he decided to leave the sport, although he did have to vacate his title, he technically didn't actually lose it to anyone.
That's true.
This is very different.
That is true. So Usman's in for a hell of a test, and I think for Dominance MMA, this is kind of a night to forget. This was
for sure.
This was a bad one.
Not just a night to forget, but this has been a really difficult year for Trevor Whitman, I would say.
0-3. I think his fighters are in title fights now.
It's been a really rough year. Yeah, you got Rose, you got Justin Gaethje, and now you have Usman, 0-3.
So of course now that Dana kind of hyping Usman as the greatest welterweight of all time, but you know what? To his credit, now he gets one of the greatest. His promotion gets one of the greatest moments in mixed martial arts history. And credit to Usman and Dana, now that Leon has won this fight, and in the fashion that he did, combined with Usman winning their non-title fight 6-7 years ago, obviously we have to have a title rematch, which would be technically a trilogy fight, but of course, the second title fight. Right. And Dana wants it at Wembley Stadium. He thinks he can get 70, 80,000 people in Wembley Stadium.
Well, if you read between the lines, he was partially joking about that because obviously he doesn't want to see his fights outside. So I don't think it'll be at Wembley. Would it be massive at Wembley? Of course, but I think they're going to have to likely find another indoor arena because, as you know, Dana's not been the biggest fan of going outside unless he absolutely has to. So that'll be interesting. I mean, that would be really cool if they could get it done. But I don't think anybody should be getting their hopes up about specifically Wembley anytime soon. But for sure, it would be a mixed martial arts crime if somehow, some way, this isn't the next welterweight title fight, this upcoming trilogy. It would be absolutely sad.
Yeah, outdoor MMA kinda can backfire. I remember going to I had a friend who basically was doing amateur MMA. He was going to be making his amateur debut, and it took place at a baseball stadium down in New Jersey. And basically, they used the wrong substance on the cage, supposedly. And when it rained, it made the fight mat way too slippery, and they ended up canceling like the second half of the card. So my friend never got to fight.
Yeah, that's awful. I've never been to an outdoor MMA event, but I can only imagine how difficult those would be, not only to put on, but just from a fan experience, it not being the most pleasant. But yeah, nonetheless, it's going to be a great trilogy. Obviously, I don't know anything, but I can say that given the UFC's recent track record of going to England, I think March of 2023 could be a targeted date and month for that trilogy fight.
I was just thinking that. I feel like UFC's first 3 pay-per-views of 2023 are probably going to be all international. You got Brazil in January. I would assume, like you, I was thinking England in March. I would have to assume maybe they would try to return to Australia in February if possible for Volkanovski.
Yeah, that's only if the COVID restrictions ease. But what would be really cool, I know they don't do these cards anymore, but a February card in Vegas kind of like a throwback would make a lot of sense too.
Maybe a card on Super Bowl weekend like they used to.
Absolutely, yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
I wouldn't be opposed to it. That's usually a fight night, but who knows with how nutty the world has been lately. I could see them going back to Vegas after December. So,
All right. Let's
yeah,
move on to.
yeah. I mean, we're already looking at several massive title fights to start the year anyway. So it'll be interesting to see what the locations might end up being.
So moving on now to the co-main event of UFC 278, Paulo Costa, Luke Rockhold. Wild fight, like I put it in the description, and it's like you could go from it from a couple of perspectives. You could say wild fight in that those two were throwing haymakers, throwing power like crazy, and then you could also say wild fight in that it was also kind of sloppy. It went both ways, I think.
Yeah, it was a super sloppy fight. To be honest with you, it's one of those fights that Luke Rockhold shouldn't have been in. I mean, if you look at his body language, he looked like he didn't want to be there. And what was frustrating was that Costa had several chances to finish that fight very early on and couldn't get him out of there. I don't know if it was that Costa didn't want to exert a lot of energy or what it was, but Costa should have more than likely won that fight earlier than he did. But I will say, Luke Rockhold's heart and toughness can't be discredited. He was in that fight every second. He was throwing combinations. He nearly had Costa on his back foot a couple times. Um, you know, you know, I don't think it's one of those fights where if you look at the box score, so to speak, or if you look at the judges' scorecards, it doesn't reflect how competitive at times that fight really was. If you were to put it that way.
Agreed that basically Rockhold stayed in it as long as he could. He actually ended up going the distance with Costa. If you remember our best bets segment, which didn't exactly go too well last week.
No,
Unfortunately, that's one we took L's on.
no,
We had it first, second round.
yeah, we had it in the first or second round, and we were close. We were close a couple of times. I was thinking that the few times that Costa got him up against the fence, I'm like, okay, here he goes, he's gonna do it. And all of a sudden, like at the very last time, Rockhold did enough to stay in there.
Yeah,
And
this
yeah,
is one of those. This is one of those fights, Zan, that I say, yeah, it was fun. Yeah,
it
it
was
was sloppy. It was a little sloppy. Kind of, you get a giggle out of it. But and Luke Rockhold, I was gonna say it wouldn't have done him any favors, but alas, he has retired following that fight, and it just, Zan, to me, he never was the same after losing the title to Bisping.
no, he wasn't. I mean, it's obvious. Obviously, he tried to go up in weight and didn't work. And I just feel like he wasn't. I really don't think his heart was in the sport anymore after that fight. He wanted to focus on
His
other
modeling
things
gig.
like his modeling career and whatnot. And you could just tell. And I think what didn't help was, the back and forth with the UFC over several issues that he had. And I wanted to get your opinion on this. Dana said at the post fight presser that he's not going to badmouth Rockhold just because of how good the fight was. And I kind of think, I don't know about you, but I feel like in terms of the way Dana had been acting towards that fight, that I feel like someone forced him to say that. What do you think? What do you think about that?
It's tough. I mean, I will say it's surprising
Mm-hmm.
because that's not Dana-ish. Dana, like during the media week, you saw Luke Rockhold make his remarks, not giving any fucks, talking about fighter pay and
Right.
healthcare.
Exactly.
And Dana actually fired back, in a later media round. He did fire back at Rockhold. But I think it had more to do with maybe Rockhold retiring and letting him take a bow than the fight itself. I mean, credit where credit's due. It did earn fight of the night, so he got the 50K bonus along with Costa. But I think it was, it's surprising, but I think it was kind of nice for Dana to allow Rockhold to graciously bow out, take his last curtain call in the UFC. I got to give him credit there.
Oh, absolutely. And for Costa, where do you think he goes from here? Considering he's already fought for the title before, do you think he kind of sits back and waits a little bit, or do you think he takes another fight? Maybe against a Marvin Vettori or Robert Whitaker.
So great question, because that's where I was going to next. That Rockhold, it wasn't going to do him any favors until he ultimately retired in a cage. But Paulo Costa, this fight didn't do him any favors. And we'll get to another fight next that did a couple of people actually no favors. But Paulo Costa, as of this week, he is ranked number 6. He stays put in the rankings. He's actually ranked below Alex Pereira, Derek Brunson, Marvin Vettori, Cannonier, and Whitaker. So maybe he's looking at UFC Paris. Whitaker is in action there. If Whitaker pulls off the victory, Whitaker's fought for the title twice already against Israel Adesanya, so he's probably not going to be challenging Izzy anytime soon, let alone the fact that Izzy and Pereira are going to be headlining the Garden card. So if Whitaker wins his next fight, maybe Costa makes a little gunning for Whitaker.
Which I actually think that fight makes a lot of sense. I think that's a fight that could potentially make a lot of sense if Whitaker, assuming Whitaker wins on September 3rd, assuming that he wins that fight, maybe you could see that for the final December fight night show as the main event. Obviously, we're thinking hypotheticals here, but I really do think that a Costa Whitaker matchup is intriguing, just considering that they both have fought for the title before on numerous occasions. Well, I guess numerous occasions for Whitaker, that is. And they both kind of have the experience of remaining in the upper echelon of the division, and they both match up very well against each other. Obviously, Costa is a tremendous striker. Whitaker is a very well-rounded fighter who went from being a straight wrestler to obviously improving his striking leaps and bounds. So that could be a potential very interesting fight for a number one contender position. But I just feel like that division, there's a lot of question marks, and it'll be interesting to see what gets figured out as the weeks and months go by.
And actually, I think it makes sense either way if Whitaker wins or loses, because Whitaker's fighting Marvin Vettori, who, right, if you remember, Costa ended up coming into that fight 25 pounds overweight. So if Whitaker wins, Costa could gun for him, and those two could end up having a fight for Costa to basically try and get back into number one contendership. If Whitaker loses, then you're going to have two guys who are looking for a rebound. Whitaker will be looking for a rebound from a loss, and you'll have Costa looking for a rebound from a so-so performance against Rockhold. And actually, Costa and Derek Brunson seem to have never faced off either. So there's another potential fight if the UFC has other plans for Robert Whitaker, regardless of a win or loss in Paris.
Right, and that's a fight. That's a fight, the Brunson Costa fight, where I don't see in any way, shape, or form how that fight goes the distance, just considering how reckless both of their styles are. But that's either here nor there. We're just
playing matchmaker.
We're just playing matchmaker at this point. We'll see what they end up coming up with. But I am totally down for either of those two fights, although I would prefer one fight over the other. But again, we'll see what the UFC decides to do. Interesting shakeup in the middleweight division nonetheless. And, of course, from you and I, Luke Rockhold, a special career, did everything he needed to do in Strikeforce, came into the UFC, beat one of the few men to defeat Anderson Silva, didn't have the longest title run that we all thought Luke Rockhold would have, but still a very stellar career nonetheless. And, of course, you and I, for sure, both wish him well in his future endeavors, for sure.
Absolutely. Rockhold deserves it. Former Strikeforce middleweight champ, UFC middleweight champion, deserves to take a bow for an incredible career. All right. And now we actually might be saying take a bow to somebody else. So, Merab Dvalishvili, well, versus Jose Aldo. Zan, this fight made me sad. This fight
Yeah,
actually really made me sad. I
yeah.
thought it was going to be incredible, and it just bored me to tears.
No, it was a really bad fight. As I don't know if you stayed up to watch this, but Dana was very critical of Merab's performance. He didn't feel like that was a guy who really wanted to compete for a championship. And I
Well, he
mean, hey,
didn't.
which is true. He got the win. Obviously, as you all know, but it was not the win from Merab that people were expecting. And to hear him go on the MMA Hour and say that Aldo is retiring is really sad, just considering that Aldo had a tremendous career. He was riding all of this momentum with the 3-fight win streak after losing in his title fight to Peter Yan in 2020. So obviously it didn't go as well for Aldo as he had hoped. I really, really hope that his claim doesn't end up being true because Aldo is one of the best in the sport, and who deserves to stay in that upper echelon in that division. And given Merab's performance, where do you think he goes? He moved up 3 spots this week, but I mean. Is he more so kind of on a negative standpoint, just considering that his fight with Aldo didn't go so well? Where do you see him kind of landing in that division as things start to play out a little bit, especially with Sterling fighting Dillashaw next?
Yeah, so Merab put on a performance that was basically no win. He couldn't win against the fans because he beat Aldo, an absolutely legendary figure. Uh, and he did it in a way where basically, I know Merab's style is constant takedowns. He has the UFC a bantamweight record, I think, for most takedowns in a fight, but it wasn't in an exciting fashion. It wasn't like him constantly taking him down and having his way with him like that fight where he did break the record. And I think, yeah, Dana, we've seen Dana with as much as Dana might try to deny, he is a striking based, he's a striking based guy with looks. In other words, Dana prefers strikers over grapplers, I would say. And Merab didn't do himself any favors, but I think Merab made his situation worse when he got on the mic post fight and said, "Yeah, I'm not going to fight Aljo." Zan, what did we say last week? Dana White does not care if you guys are the best of friends, if you guys are just teammates and just acquaintances, or you're the worst of enemies. If there is a major fight to be made, he will
Yeah,
make it and he will try to ensure. And he says, you as a fighter should try to make it. So he kind of proved Dana's point in that post fight, saying he didn't fight like a person who really wanted a title shot. And then obviously, I'm not going to believe Aldo was retired until we hear from Aldo and his team himself.
right.
But for Merab to go on MMA Hour and do something like that, I think is kind of disgusting on Merab Dvalishvili's part. So combined with everything this week, no way Merab gets a title fight next. He's going to have to go through a couple of people. And regardless, we can't even pick what Merab's would-be title fight is until, as you mentioned, in a couple of months, we see Aljo and TJ Dillashaw fight for the bantamweight title in Abu Dhabi. So for Merab, I mean, you know, maybe Peter Yan next because Peter Yan's the former champion, and
Right.
Yan
But
and
right,
Aljo had a big rivalry last year.
right, but that's also, but again, you're assuming that Peter Yan is going to beat Sean O'Malley.
That's true too. So okay. So if Sean O'Malley beats Peter Yan, do you feed Merab to Sean O'Malley?
I think it makes a lot of sense. What do you think?
I think so.
Just,
I
just,
think
just
I, I think it's a
considering,
I sorry
just considering, just considering that he would have beat two top, two top 8 level fighters in that same division in back to back fights.
very very true. Although on the sake of Dana and Sean O'Malley and Sean O'Malley's promotion, you know, a fight with Merab could be kind of a trap because Merab has been on an absolute tear at bantamweight basically since 2018. I know he lost his first two couple of fights in the UFC, but I think one of them was a fairly good fight. And he actually, one of his two losses, he lost in like the final seconds in a chokehold. So I can't, you know, I still like Merab, but this is a fight where he did himself no favors. And this was a fight that was kind of, it's a fight that should have elevated him, and it didn't. In fact, it set him back.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. And also it's just one of those fights where, you weren't expecting Merab to fight that poorly. That's the thing that was the most surprising about it. You were expecting that to be an all out action packed war for 15 minutes, and that's simply not what we got. And
No.
yeah, I do think Merab going as far to say that Aldo is retiring, I think is a little bit out of bounds too. If he truly knows that, that needs to be kept private until Aldo and his team, like you said, release it for real that he is in fact retired. So,
And I would give an absolute tip of the cap if Aldo really is retiring. You know, longtime featherweight champion. And he was actually doing fairly well for it. Didn't start that way, but he ends up doing very well for himself down at bantamweight. So, you know, I hope we get a couple more fights out of Aldo, but if this is the end, then here's to him. And if it's not the end, then Merab Dvalishvili's popularity and reputation is going to go further down more than just this fight did.
oh, for sure. And I guess we can say with confidence that it was nothing like Merab's win to get him into the UFC against Adrian Stotts
Absolutely not.
with that beautiful flying knee. It was anything but that. And for those of you guys who missed the fight by some miracle, you didn't miss much at all. So yeah.
All right, let's briefly get into the rest of UFC 278. So we always put out those things after UFC cards, you know, great, good, fair, meh, poor. So here's my take, Zan. I think that those last couple of fights, the wild but sloppy Rockhold Paulo Costa fight, and the main event, the big moment of the main event, the history-making main event, kind of saved this show. It started well on the early prelims, and then once we got to the TV prelims, I don't know if you feel the same way, but once we got to the TV prelims, this show kind of fell off a cliff until the end.
Just I'm looking at my sheet here of what the card was. There were a couple of forgettable fights on this card, although I was very impressed with Tyson Pedro's performance on this card, and I was also impressed with
Pudilova?
Pudilova as well. And I was quite disappointed in Jared Gordon's performance just because Jared Gordon tries to make everything exciting. He beat a guy who was 42 years old. I was thinking that he would perform a little bit better, but it's okay. He got the win. And
I have to say, I know the decision itself was kind of controversial. It was his first loss, and he fought a ranked heavyweight. But Tibur Romanov kind of really disappointed me.
Yeah, I agree. But the first three fights were good, especially the very first fight too.
Alamo defeating Daniel Lacerda
worked fantastic.
Absolutely, and I got to give credit to Amir Albazi defeating Francisco Figueiredo, who they've been hyping, the brother of the flyweight champ himself, Davison.
And the way he did it was just masterful, and how fast he did it was even more impressive.
For sure.
But I would say if I were to give this card a grade, I would give it like a B-.
Yeah, I was going to actually heading into the co-main event with Rockhold Costa on our little chart. I would have voted in the fair meh category with a big emphasis on the meh. I think those last two fights saved it to be overall a fair card. Let's be honest, it's going to be remembered for one or two things. It's definitely going to be remembered for the upset that Edwards pulled off. Maybe Rockhold's retirement as well. And if Aldo ends up retiring, it'll be also remembered for Aldo's retirement. Of course, those two will be, down here, while Edwards' fight was going to be a hell of a lot more memorable. But yeah, this was, maybe this summer lull late summer, early fall lull is kind of needed because this card was not
Yeah.
good.
Would you go as far to say, Tom, that this was the worst UFC event of the summer after just an insane run of 6 fantastic shows?
Yes, for the summer, yes. For this month, yes. Overall, for the year, just going off of my memory, yes, I'd have to look back further, but probably worst pay-per-view for the UFC this year so far.
Yeah, worst pay-per-view of the year. Obviously, of course, minus the easy main event, because could you imagine if that main event doesn't happen? There's a good chance that probably nobody remembers this card.
Yeah, I actually, again, if the main event had ended like seemed like it was going to, with Usman just 49-46ing or 49-45ing Leon Edwards, I probably would have given this a meh grade. I probably would have given it C, maybe D+. This was not a good card.
No, it was not. Well,
Leon Edwards single-handedly saved this card. Let's put it that way.
He really did. And I immediately thought of this too, and we forgot to talk about this before we started. But could you imagine, Tom, the people who left the arena after the run? Because I'm sure there were tons of people that wanted to get home. Oh, I can only imagine what those people were feeling like if they actually chose to leave the arena.
They feel like idiots afterward.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine all the people that maybe thought that Usman won, only to find out that he lost. Oh, and the craziest part, I'm not sure if you saw it on the broadcast, but there was the DraftKings Sportsbook has those big ass bet alerts, and one of those cashed for $264,000. So
yeah, I'm certain some people became very rich in that last minute.
Yeah, very, very, very rich. I even saw some cash out values for Usman before the kick landed that were as high as 4,000.
John Anik said on I think it was the post fight little segment right at the end of the pay-per-view, at the start of round 5 on DraftKings, Usman was a minus 10,000 favorite at that point in a live bet.
That's insane.
So if you did a live bet on Edwards in round 5, oh man, somebody is going to turn into Ted DiBiase at some point soon.
And who knows, maybe somebody is officially retired as of today.
Somebody is going to be moving to basically the mountains and nowhere to be seen, like Brock Lesnar today.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't
just for the record, for anyone that is curious, that was neither of us. We had a really poor weekend. The picks that we gave you guys did not do very well. We can definitely reassure you guys that this won't become a consistent habit. We're actually pretty good at picking MMA fights.
I'm holding the L to my head because I take the L. I take a loss this week.
Yeah, this was just a bad weekend for both of us. But nonetheless, yes, the main event did save UFC 278 in Salt Lake City, which now leads us to the first dead week of UFC minus the Contender Series in maybe 2.5 months, which is crazy to even think about, that now there's no card this weekend.
No. Yeah, nothing really going on with the UFC. I mean, everything is kind of, it's the end of the summer, which, as a school teacher, depresses me. But here we are. We are heading into fall. We've got Paris in a couple of weeks. UFC 279, Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. I don't know how to feel about that card because so little, like this card has some decent name value, but ended up not going well, even compared to fight nights. because like UFC 279 looks even weaker. But what do we constantly say about the UFC and these weak-looking cards that they put on? Somehow they always deliver.
They end up being fantastic. Which I have to ask you this: it was announced at the end of the pay-per-view and during the media availability, Tony Ferguson versus Li Jingliang is in place for UFC 279 at 170. What do you think? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I don't know how to feel about this. I mean, Tony Ferguson, let's face it, lightweight, even though bantamweight may have lapped it, lightweight is still a hell of a division when you got Charles Oliveira, Poirier, Gaethje, Islam, Chandler, Fiziev, Dariush, Gamrot, Sirkin, Sarukian, RDA, and Tony Ferguson has not been on winning ways. Tony Ferguson has kind of been a changed man ever since he lost to Justin Gaethje. Ever since he and Khabib got canceled because of the pandemic again, and he ended up cutting weight anyway, and then cutting weight again to fight Gaethje and getting creamed in Jacksonville.
Yeah,
He looked
and
terrible.
His career since then has not been the same. He lost that fight. He lost to the eventual lightweight champion, and then of course he gets steamrolled by by Michael Chandler with one of the nastiest kicks you've ever seen. So
it's like, and what doesn't help things with Ferguson is you think back a few years ago when he was having the mental health issues with the situation with he and his wife. I was feeling like after his last fight, maybe it might have been time. He didn't take any additional head damage at that last fight. I said, okay, maybe it's time for Tony to hang it up. But no, he's going to keep going. And you know what the UFC does when former champs, interim or undisputed, when they move up a weight class, they give him a tough test, and he gets Li Jingliang.
Yeah, I mean this is a fight that is easily the biggest fight of Jingliang's career, and if he can win this fight, wow, is he a problem at 170?
Yes, I'm a little nervous for Ferguson trying this out.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the smartest idea from Ferguson's perspective, but I mean, I don't see. I don't like to make guarantees on this show, but if this fight goes the distance, I will be very, 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 very surprised. I just feel like somebody is getting finished in this fight,
and I just feel like, if Ferguson was struggling with the fighters of today at lightweight, I don't know if he, so he's being faced up with Li Jingliang, who's number 14. Can Tony Ferguson beat a Chiesa, a Magny, a Pereira? Maybe. But then you match him up against some of these guys in the top 10, like, your Vicente Luques, your Sean Brady's, your Jeff Neal's, Stephen Thompson's, Jemayev. Can he beat any of them?
It's hard to say. Maybe
it's too tough. I don't know.
Maybe the 2016 version of Tony Ferguson, but
right. But that's not who's fighting at welterweight right now. It's the 2022 version.
Right. It's the 2022 version exactly. I feel like this is a make it or break it fight for Ferguson too.
Absolutely.
Given his current losing streak, and for sure, if Jingliang wins, it's hard not to see him in a title fight in mid 2023 if he can win this fight and stay the course.
Yeah, if he wins this fight, Jingliang, I can definitely see him moving up to 9 or 10 in the rankings, and then he will position himself basically 1 or 2 big performances away from a title shot. Obviously, the welterweight picture is kind of on hold right now. Chimaev, speaking of UFC 279, sorry, buddy, you're going to have to wait a little bit for your chance at the title, which means if he ends up beating Nate Diaz, like many of the experts believe, then he's going to have to fight somebody like a Colby Covington or a Gilbert Burns for a potential, as a one fight, hey, if you win this, you're guaranteed the next title shot kind of performance. I don't know if Chimaev is going to be able to, or be able to afford to kind of hold out. Speaking of Gilbert Burns, obviously, if you've been following our Outsiders account, trying to follow the story a little bit, Gilbert Burns made an appearance during the media rounds before 278 saying he versus George Masvidal is on. And then Masvidal saying, what are you talking about, buddy? And Helwani reporting basically that the fight was offered, but no contracts have officially been signed as of yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting fight if it does end up coming to fruition. Again, I really don't see how Gilbert Burns loses that fight. I just think Masvidal is on the downside of his career. He had his little mini run in 2019 with those wins against Askren and Diaz, but ever since then, he really has not been the same fighter. And if that fight happens, I think Burns is looking at a solid win on his record and a win.
I think he might be looking at a finish then. I think he could finish Masvidal.
I agree, and that's obviously has not been easy to do in the past, but just the way that Masvidal's chin has been susceptible to big shots, I could see it.
And just the simple fact, we're talking about how dominant Usman was. Gilbert Burns versus Kamaru Usman. What was that? When was that? Like last year? That was before the Masvidal rematch. Mm-hmm. If you remember, Gilbert Burns damaged Usman right at the start of the fight. Burns could have been the welterweight champion at that point. He did something that Masvidal wasn't able to do in either two of his title shots. Mm-hmm. I think Gilbert Burns is a bad matchup for Masvidal, and I said it in our earlier episodes, and I'll say it here because now that fight's it's not official, but it's looking close. Dana, missed opportunity. This is a ball drop. You could have had Conor versus Masvidal, and that pay-per-view would have drawn numbers. If you go through with Burns Masvidal loses, you're never seeing that fight ever.
Agreed.
That's a drop ball by the UFC.
But it goes back to Dana's original point that he thinks that Conor is too big for Masvidal, which I don't buy for a second, considering that McGregor's fought Cerrone at 170 and he's also fought
Diaz at 170.
So it's like, why not make the fight? We'll never know, but yeah, I could see where the ball drop claim comes from, but just for a little bit of a counterpoint, Dana has stated publicly that he does not like Conor at 170. So we'll see how this all plays out. We'll even see if this fight happens, but yeah, for sure, I would agree with you there that if they go with Burns Masvidal, that Conor Masvidal fight is dead, assuming that Masvidal loses.
And one counterpoint to Dana's would-be counterpoint. When's Conor ever going to fight for a title again? I know there have been the rumors that if an opportunity ever opened up for Oliveira, maybe he and Conor have a title fight. Why should Conor have a title fight?
It just doesn't make sense. He's won what? One meaningful fight since 2016. You could argue that he's won no meaningful fights since 2016.
Since becoming champ. Yeah. Right. Because I don't buy that Cerrone fight as meaningful. Maybe at the time, maybe pre-pandemic, but ever since then, no.
Right, exactly.
So
I don't know. His greatest comeback in sports history claim is a really, really hard one to justify, considering his recent losing streak of epic proportions.
But my point, Zan, is just, Conor, UFC will always look to book Conor, but he's a great draw, but that's really what he's good for now is money fights. Maybe a 4-fight with Poirier for the bad blood. Conor versus Masvidal. If it hadn't been for Nate Diaz's fallout with the UFC and Nate and UFC have been on better terms, a trilogy fight that has been asked for years now.
That just doesn't make sense to me either. You go with Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz on Nate Diaz's last fight of his
because they're trying to feed up Khamzat's hype.
I know, but it's just like when the Conor trilogy is right there. Why don't you just make the fight? I don't get it. But nonetheless, it'll be a very interesting few months in both welterweight and lightweight just to see how everything plays out. And yeah, I could definitely see what you're saying, that Connor's just used for money fights is now becoming more and more apparent.
So let's briefly go into other some other things we got to recap. Obviously, boxing had a very big fight right before UFC 278, a fight that was kind of more entertaining than most of the fights on UFC 278. Oleksandr Usyk retaining his WBA, IBF, WBO heavyweight titles, becoming the new Ring Magazine heavyweight champion. He's just missing the WBC and the lineal. And, Tyson Fury, like we kind of predicted, doesn't seem to be hanging it up for reals anytime soon. So, hey, boxing commissions, here's your opportunity. Now, how are you going to blow this one?
Yeah, this is your classic case of boxing. It's going to boxing. Right? So now we have a scenario where Usyk is up 2-0 against Joshua. And, I thought he looked very impressive in that fight. He used his combinations very well, frustrated Joshua with the jab, hurt Joshua several times. A lot of people had it 5-5, or at least I did. I had it 5-5 through 10. It was a very close fight, but I really do think those last two rounds, Usyk really turned up. You could argue that fight was even 8-4. There's no way that Joshua won, but for sure, I could easily see I could have easily seen a 116, 112 out of that. And I really do think the judges got this one right, because as you know, in boxing, there are some really criminally bad decisions. Every once in a while, I was a little worried that it happened when one of the judges gave the fight to Joshua.
Let's talk about Glenn Feldman. Oh, man. So I agree with you. I had it around the 116, 112 mark. I think Usyk had the win. And then once I heard Feldman's scorecard read for Joshua in Saudi Arabia on a close fight, I said, here we go. Here we freaking go. Boxing is going to boxing again.
Thankfully they didn't mess the decision up. But yeah, with Fury not wanting to give up his lineal title, now I think our claim that him retiring is quote unquote bullshit, I think is starting to become more and more true, because if these commissions really wanted to, the WBC title could have been on the line last weekend, and it wasn't. And it just leads me to believe there's no other way about this than to make an Usyk Fury fight for all the marbles. And in terms of Joshua, there's just been a lot of talk, overall, who is he going to fight next? Do you think if Wilder wins his next fight, that Wilder versus Joshua is something that you want to see, or would you want to see Joshua fight somebody else?
So here's the thing I say about Wilder versus Joshua. It's in no way the same hype level that it could have been 4 years ago when both were on top of the heavyweight scene in boxing. It's not at that hype, but I think the hype is still there. I think that fight should still happen. It's just disappointing. It's not going to be for heavyweight titles. But I think the fight can still happen if Wilder does win his next fight. Now, you look at the boxing rankings, at least the ones I have on here. You have Joe Joyce ranked number 2 in the WBC and 1 in the WBO.
Can you share your screen?
Can
you share your screen?
Oh, yeah, actually, let me share the tab here. I'm looking at the boxing scenes ranking list. This was last updated. At the WBO was the most recent. But just looking at this, just trying to, even if these aren't up to date, just painting the picture a little bit. You have Tyson Fury at the top of the WBC, of course. Usyk, WBA, IBF, WBO. Dubois, I believe Dubois is the regular champion. The stupid WBA stuff that pisses me off. But you got Joe Joyce ranked number 2 at the WBC and number 1 in the WBO. Joseph Parker, the former WBO champion, ranked just under him in both. IBF, there was a title eliminator the other night, right before Usyk and Joshua took to the ring. IBF number 1, I believe it says not rated because that's a Russian fighter, and the Russian fighters aren't being recognized as a result of the war that's going
Right.
on with Ukraine. So,
Exactly.
I mean, you look at this Hunter Helenius. Maybe if you want to give Joe Joyce the shot at somebody, but it's
Yeah,
just
just considering that Joe Joyce's name could get built off of one of those guys if he fights for them, because I can almost guarantee you the casual fan probably does not know who Joe Joyce is, maybe in comparison to like how you or I know who
correct.
likely who half of these boxers are.
But
So yeah,
then, but then, in it sounds selfishly, I would rather Joyce take step aside money, fight the winner of the upcoming Ruiz Jr. versus King Kong Ortiz fight, and we get our undisputed title fight that we've been waiting so long for. Do I think that's going to happen? No, because I think one of these commissions are going to look at Joe Joyce and force a mandatory fight with either Fury or Usyk. But
yeah, which I think that's jumping Joyce a little bit too early.
I
But of
agree.
course, but of course they're only looking at dollar signs and networks, and they're not actually looking at the big picture. So
Correct. I would rather, like I kind of implied, I would rather give Joe Joyce a fight and hopefully for his sake a win over another big name like a Ruiz Jr. or a King Kong Ortiz, or have he and Parker faced off before?
I don't believe so.
Or Parker then. I would rather get one fight with a former champion to give him that little more push.
I could see it. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how those heavyweight divisions pan out. Um,
Yeah,
well,
move.
well, hang on. Now that
Okay.
now that you're just on that topic, um, they don't have a they don't have a date. Um, but it seems like Joyce versus Parker is is next as of the beginning of this month. They just don't
Okay.
they just don't have a date yet.
Okay, so they're in negotiation. It's not official. So, in one way, this is kind of playing into my argument of giving, Joyce a former champion to get a win over. But the timing of this, Zan, the timing scares me. Like, right as we have this opening, it feels like once Joyce wins this fight with Parker, we're going to have an issue. That one of
Right.
these organizations is going to make him the mandatory.
For sure. And I have to ask you this, since obviously we've never been to a major boxing match. I think either of us before. If there was one dream fight that you could go to before the end of 2022, what would it be? My pick is easy, but I'm just curious if you were to go to any big boxing match coming up in the near future, what would it be?
Well, if that Joshua Wilder fight comes to fruition, and it came here, I would love to be there for that. And obviously, maybe it sounds a little, you know, hometown bias, but I feel like a undisputed heavyweight championship fight between a guy like Fury and a guy like Usyk, you got to put that in the Garden. You gotta go to MSG for that.
Absolutely.
Or Vegas. Obviously, I could see it being Vegas as well.
Absolutely. I don't think I'm gonna go to this fight, but if I were to pick one big boxing match to go to, I would definitely try to go to Crawford Spence. Although
Yeah.
that's a really tough ticket to get. There was actually before the fight was canceled and before the fight was moved to Florida, I did have plans to go to the Adrian Broner fight, so I was pretty bummed that it didn't even happen,
For sure.
because
All
it was
right.
rumored to be in Chicago, and it moved to Florida, and then obviously the fight was canceled, and then Whippet stepped in. So yeah,
Mm-hmm. All right, one more we got to talk about in terms of recap. The PFL Championship card in November is set now. Obviously, going into this past weekend's card, we had Stevie Ray OAM set for lightweights, Omari Akhmedov, Rob Wilkinson set at light heavyweights, Ante Delija, Matthew Sheffel at heavyweight, Delano Taylor after his upset of Rory, facing Sabadu Sai, who also beat Rory McDonald earlier this year. And now, after this past weekend's card, at featherweight, it's locked in. Brendan Loughnane will be fighting Bubba Jenkins. And once again, women's lightweight, we get Kayla Harrison and Larissa Pacheco. So I have to say, the PFL card, definitely a lot more entertaining, a lot more shorter, and yet a lot more entertaining than UFC 278 was.
For sure. The Loughnane fight was awesome.
Loughnane Wade match of the night between the two cards.
Yeah, and that might have been in the single most entertaining MMA fight of the weekend, arguably.
I agree. Loughnane
just
versus
in terms
Wade.
of overall fight value, the heart, the determination, how close the fight was at various points, and it's the overall energy of the crowd made that fight feel really big.
Absolutely. And then Kayla Harrison, Larissa Pacheco, like I said, there's no surprise there. And I think it kind of emphasizes the point. You know, at the PFL, people were always trying to hype it up. You know, Larissa is the one who can beat Kayla because of the familiarity these two are going to have. This is going to be their third fight overall, second as a PFL tournament final. I just don't know. I don't know if I can buy it. Yet at the same rate, like we mentioned last week, they cannot, going into their new model of more international cards, trying to get to pay-per-view next year, they cannot have Kayla Harrison lose this tournament final.
No, there's a lot at stake with that, and they know they have a lot riding on that fight. And I just think that, you know, if Pacheco could somehow keep it standing, maybe the fight is interesting. But I just fear that no one can stop Kayla's judo. Like once you get your opponent on your back, and you're Kayla Harrison, the fight is basically over, no matter what position he decides to put her opponent in. And I just worry that unless Larissa can keep it standing and allow Kayla Harrison to fight Larissa's fight, I don't see how it goes any differently than the first two. I really don't.
I agree.
I just think there's so much riding on the fight, considering that, you know, there's talks of a Chris Cyborg fight in the future, and all of this other stuff that the PFL wants to do with Kayla. That if she loses, they also lose too, because their investment in her takes a major hit. But then again, though, then what do you do? Larissa somehow wins that tournament final. What do you do? Do you make another tournament and centered on those two and try to get them to run back and forth fight? I don't know, but I just think it's worst case scenario for PFL if Kayla loses. Very similar to when the UFC brought Chuck Liddell over to Pride, and of course the UFC
lost to Rampage.
Right, and as to Rampage, the UFC wanted Chuck to win so they could say that they were the more superior organization over Pride, and that didn't happen.
No.
So,
and what did you make of that promo, by the way, at the end? Kayla calling herself the queen of women's MMA and calling out Cyborg and Nunes. I thought it was fantastic as a promo, but the balls on her to do that.
That took a lot of guts for her to say that. If you just look at all of their bodies of work side by side, you can't tell me that Kayla Harrison is the women's MMA queen. It isn't true. You can't tell me that the level of competition in the PFL is anything close to Bellator or the UFC. It just isn't true.
No.
Yeah.
And you're never going to see Kayla versus Nunes unless Kayla goes to the UFC, because, again, like we mentioned last week, Dana, because of the Chuck Liddell Pride thing, very with promotion. UFC is its own universe, kind of like I made the example a couple weeks ago, kind of like how the WWE is the WWE and they don't do cross promotion with other wrestling
Right,
promotions.
like AEW and stuff like that.
Right. The UFC is in its own bubble.
Exactly. And apparently, obviously it's true. They try to make the best fight the best, and I just feel like some of these other promotions don't do that. But I also feel like obviously we don't really know the insights of what exactly happened, but I can almost with certainty say that whatever Kayla Harrison wanted, the UFC was more than likely not able to match it. And then of course with Nunes losing to Pena, that also didn't help things with Kayla Harrison in the audience too. So
for sure. All right, time to get out of the review mode. We're wrapping up this episode here. We're going to do a couple of previews. So first of all, the biggest fight of this weekend is on Prime Video. One, I believe it's called One Fight Night outside of North America. And it is a rematch that some of us have kind of been waiting for in one. Adriano Moraes defending the one flyweight title once again against the former long-time UFC flyweight champion, the former long-time pound-for-pound king in the UFC, Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson. Now, as I get this up on my screen here, Zan, earlier today, before we started recording this episode, I rewatched that fight between Moraes and Mighty Mouse, and Moraes kind of surprised me back then, and it kind of still did so in this little rewatch. You saw DJ, and if you can note here on Tapology that Johnson 66-inch reach, 69.3 for Moraes. So DJ had to constantly come forward, try to bring the pressure and strike Moraes. And Moraes was able to keep his distance, fought from distance. And actually, I think he hurt DJ a little bit before DJ scored a takedown in the first round. And then in the second round, as DJ tried to come in again, Moraes caught him and was able to finish him on the ground.
Yeah. I was gonna say the one thing I remember of that fight is DJ getting caught twice, and the second time cost him the fight. So, before watching these two, I didn't know who Adriano Moraes was, and now I think, we don't really talk about global divisional rankings on this show, but if you were to look at the flyweight landscape as a whole, and look at the UFC in one, if Moraes wins this fight, or compared to the likes of Figueiredo and Moreno.
I know where you're going with this, Sam. One thing, just remember, one championship because of the weight stuff, everybody's up 10 pounds. So technically, this is a 135-pound fight. This would be.
That is true. You have a good point. They do that system a little differently with the hydration and all of that. But my general question was, where do you put either of them depending on who wins amongst the likes of the current UFC champions, at flyweight and bantamweight respectively?
Well, DJ, in my honest opinion, even with his loss with Moraes the first time around, he's still the flyweight GOAT. You can talk about Figueiredo trying to basically put the division back. You can talk about Cejudo, being Triple C. DJ is still the flyweight GOAT to me. He is the man who kind of put flyweight on the map. I know when he originally won the UFC title was controversial against Benavidez, but he goes on that tear, breaks Anderson Silva's record. He is, one of the best, if not the best fighters, not just at flyweight, all time when it comes to mixed martial arts, especially in those lighter weight classes. Moraes, he actually had a bit of a rivalry where basically him and I think it's Bibiano basically traded over the one flyweight title. But Moraes, it's funny. We don't, one championship, got some attention when it had Askren and company in the mid 2010s. But it seemed like ever since the acquisition of DJ and some of these bigger names, now it hasn't worked completely in their favor.
No, it hasn't.
but you still see one getting attention, and one of the biggest benefiters of one's, global expansion and one bringing in all these names is Moraes himself.
For sure. It's another thing I wanted to mention was, though, what kind of hurts one is, you don't see them being talked about, like on an ESPN or a Fox Sports. You have to really dig deep and be a true consumer of the sport to really know that, one has some pretty talented fighters that people just haven't really seen yet.
Correct. And it doesn't help that, one used to have those specials on USA during the pandemic. And basically, ever since the pandemic kind of ended, you saw, I don't think those one specials really air on USA anymore. And, it stinks for us here in the States, some of us who have full-time jobs who try to balance being an MMA superfan and light media member, we can't watch until after all those fights happen because it's so early over here on Friday mornings.
True. But I guess what's nice now is one is on a platform like Amazon Prime Video that is easy to get, and it's finally on a platform that no one has to Google. People just know it.
Correct. In terms of a rematch, I hate to say it with DJ, but when I was rewatching that first fight, I wasn't impressed. I feel like Moraes had control the whole time. That I don't, credit to DJ again. He is still the GOAT in my heart, but I don't know how he beats Moraes.
I would have to respectfully disagree with you, and I actually think Mighty Mouse is going to win. Is going to win a decision.
Okay.
I really do. I think he's had over a year to figure this out, and I think he's gonna make some necessary adjustments, and I think he's gonna make Moraes fight his fight and claim another belt in another organization. And,
I think his GOAT status only goes. I think his GOAT status only goes further if that ends up being what happens.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, my prediction is a DJ win in a possible trilogy fight down the line. I like Moraes. I think he's a fantastic fighter. Obviously, his record is super impressive, but it's hard to quote unquote bet against DJ coming off of a loss, and I just don't see how he loses back to back to the same fighter. I really don't. So
it's fair. It's a fair prediction. Mm-hmm. Very fair prediction. It's good to see, like you said, one championship on a platform, you don't have to do all this research for. Like you said, very quiet weekend. We just have a lot of quite a few regional cards. You got LFA 140, CFFC 112, ACA 143. Let's talk about Zain. Maybe one regional fighter that people should have their eyes on when it comes to UFC Fight Pass. I'll go first. LFA has a match in their main events for the vacant flyweight title. They got Carlos Mota going up against Rizvan Abuev coming out of Russia. He is one of those Sambo and Sanda fighters, and he's got plenty of finishes. He has plenty of power. If you keep it standing, you're in danger of getting a power shot to the head. If he takes you to the ground, you're in danger of being choked. He has a 12-3 record, and one of those losses then came in Fight Nights Global against Tyson Nam, a very respectable flyweight fighter in the UFC right now. So I feel like he's got the most of the headliners at LFA and CFFC. He has the most experience. He has the most finishes. I feel like Rizvan is one to keep an eye out for. And, who knows? Maybe if Rizvan Abuev wins this LFA flyweight title, maybe we do see him in the UFC.
Yeah, I like the main event too, but I want to go with someone in the co-main event, Marion Santos, and he's 12-1. I've been kind of keeping tabs on this kid for a little bit. His last MMA fight took place in 2021 as a member of Showtime Fights, so he has not competed under the LFA banner according to Tapology here. He just came off of a grappling win in May of this year, and I just think he seems to be good everywhere. He wins consistently up until that loss. He was on a pretty healthy winning streak. So That's obviously a real positive to see. And the UFC is looking for up and coming prospects. This kid's only 22 years old, so he has a super bright future. And bantamweight is a loaded division, and it's hard to see it's hard it's hard to see this kid not getting signed in the future, especially if he wins his fight this weekend. And I wanted to make a slight correction. He actually has fought in the PFL once before, and it was his only loss. It was back in February of earlier this year to Daniel Argueta. So I really do think that Santos is somebody that you should keep an eye on.
Hey, Argueta, another talented young up and comer. That's not a bad loss.
No, it isn't.
All right. So, Zan, before we go, and I got, again, LFA 140, CFFC 112, ACA 143. If you need your fight fix this weekend, UFC Fight Pass for the LFA and CFFC cards this weekend. And actually, I think CFFC has a grappling card on Saturday as well.
Yeah, where can people watch ACA for those who don't know?
Let me double check. I think ACA has
there's that internet pay-per-view.
That might be internet pay-per. Yeah, it's internet pay-per-view.
Okay.
Internet pay-per-view. But Fight Pass, LFA, CFFC, two of the best, organizations for young up-and-comers. So if you want to see the future, keep an eye out there.
Yeah, and two of the best organizations for Dana White looking for a fight as well.
True.
He goes to those shows all the time. Oh, you never know. Potentially the matchmakers could be watching one of those three shows, and if your name pops up, they might be interested. So,
all right, Zan. Before we go, I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about this. So, those of you who don't know this clip that I am talking about, Joel Bauman, who had actually made an appearance on Looking for a Fight earlier this year, ended up losing by submission. You may know him a few months later. His post-fight interview went viral when he claimed that fight where he lost on Looking for a Fight was because he stayed up. He pulled 30 all-nighters to make this NFT that he said was going to change the fight game, and then casually mentioned he had 2 herpes outbreaks before the fight too. You think it didn't get crazy then? Oh, it got worse this weekend after he headlined a Fury FC card, and
it absolutely got worse. And you know that Joel Bauman is famous around the MMA space because I literally did ask. I did literally ask my dad if the name Joel Bauman sounds familiar, and he's like, yeah. What did he say? What did he say this time? So he definitely remembered. He definitely remembered his claim about the all-nighters and all that. But for those of you who haven't seen this clip, we're gonna play it for you right now.
I don't think. Sorry, Zan. I don't think our words are gonna do it any justice. I think we should just throw it to it.
Those doubting my NFT, you're looking at the guy. That's the reason that college athletes and high school athletes are getting paid today. Mr. Influencer to influencers. Secondly, Jimmy Kimmel, viral this. I fight to eradicate childhood malnutrition from the planet. And until they release the flight logs, you, the mainstream media, Hollywood, are all pedophiles to me. Eat dick. Am I canceled yet.com?
Look at the interviewer's face. He had no idea what to say. The interviewer had no idea.
The funniest part is when he comes back to the microphone.
Am I canceled yet.com?
Yeah, that's my favorite part of the whole clip.
and I checked that website. It's just a whole bunch of gear that says, that has amicancelyet.com on it. That's it. What a weird sponsor. And apparently the flight logs have something to do with the Epstein stuff. I don't know how that relates to childhood malnutrition or, I'm sorry, claiming your NFT is the reason high school and college athletes can get paid now. Not all the work that was done in Washington, D.C., not all the cases against the NCAA. No, you, Mr. Bauman, and your NFT are the reason.
Yes, sometimes when you get funny MMA moments, and that has to be one of the funniest MMA moments of 2022.
It's definitely one of the most WTF moments.
Yeah, it might actually be the most bizarre MMA post-fight interview we've seen in potentially years.
What was that? I showed the clip. I talked at it. I still have no idea what that was.
Yeah, I don't know.
All I know is I can't stop watching it.
all I know is I can't stop watching it. All I know is I can't stop laughing every single time. Yeah, I can only imagine what the interviewer was feeling at that very moment. As it was going on. Obviously, he was a consummate professional, but oh my goodness, that was something that might be one of the most famous moments in the history of UFC Fight Pass.
Dana White has to be looking at that, right? He has to be looking at that and giving Bauman a second look.
Of course.
And by the way, what the hell was he wearing? And if any kids watched that, I apologize. Looking like something out of a certain 18+ place that certain people go to. I feel the sickest part. He put that on just for the post-fight interview. Like he didn't obviously fight in it. He just threw that bizarre-looking attire, to say it's an understatement, just to do the post-fight.
One quick question that I have for you. When Dana White says after every Contender Series fight that he knows that he knows absolutely nothing about any of the fighters coming in, is that a buy or from you? Because I think that's cap. He
has to know stuff in order to book these guys, right?
Right.
And if he goes and books Bauman again, he has to know about these post-fight shenanigans.
Of course. Well, unless Mick or Sean is telling him that, though. That could also be.
But still, a clip as viral as this, you're telling me he's not going to watch it?
Of course he'll see it. Yeah. But yeah, we just wanted to end the show on a little bit of a lighter note. I'll be honest with you, I'm sure most people who saw the clip didn't even actually see the fight itself.
No.
But yeah, I actually did, and I thought that his performance was very impressive. So yeah.
So it's not going to be long before this guy infiltrates one of the major organizations.
Absolutely.
All right. Make sure to hit that like button. Make sure to subscribe. And when you subscribe, make sure to ring that bell so you get all the notifications for everything here on the Empty the Bench Network, from the MMA Outsiders to Empty the Bench, from the Beyond the Bench to Game On, and from Living Life to Fruity Cereal. Make sure also to follow our work. I can be found at Fansided MMA. Zain can be found at pjpen.com. Make sure to follow us across social media at MMA Outsiders ETB. And don't forget to follow the network as well at ETB Network. Make sure to like and subscribe again, and make sure to follow us on our own social media accounts.
Yeah, I'm at Zain Bando 99 everywhere, and he's at Thomas J. Albano and at Tom Sports 9. So you can follow us there. We're gonna be back next week. We will be covering UFC Paris and all of the other happenings in the world of MMA. For those of you guys who have a little bit of a case of MMA burnout, please enjoy the weekend off. And if we could end with any sort of piece of advice, we have to go to the great James Lynch to remind you to please look at live results for the cards that you really don't care about. That way you don't have to watch every single card. And no, we are not encouraging you to only watch mixed martial arts. What we are saying is, at the very least, watch the cards that are important.
Very true. And just, next time you're asked a post-fight interview, make sure to tread lightly and, I don't know, be a Joel Bauman, but don't be a Joel Bauman. Let's put it that way.
Be Joe Piper instead.
Be Joe Piper. You know what? I think that needs to be our ending from now on. Thanks for watching the MMA Outsiders. And remember, be Joe Piper.
Be Joe
Piper. All right. So for Zain, Bando, I'm Tom Albano. We'll see you next week on the MMA Outsiders. And until then, be Joe Piper. Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.